Hi guys, welcome to your first Excel workshop. This week we're going to talk about categorical data, and as well as learning some sort of general Excel functions to introduce the program to you, we will be talking about specifically how to handle categories in Excel. So we're using a data set based on chocolate, just like we chatted about last week. So these are the contents of a box of celebrations. So as a first general introduction into Excel, it's a program that is mainly used for storing and sort of summarizing and exploring data. So for us, it's usually the first step that we take from having collected data on a research project or an idea in the field. Between that and essentially then going into more in-depth statistical analysis, we usually store and explore our data in Excel first. So it's a very vital step. While Excel is the sort of data storage program, we then have things like SPSS, which we'll introduce later on in the module, that we use to analyze that data. Okay, so generally how Excel works is it's based on a coordinate grid system where each of these cells, so each of the squares that you see here, has a designated coordinate space, a bit like battleships, I suppose. So you have your columns at the top, which are designated with letters A through to however many columns you have, and then your rows, the horizontal ones, are numbered. Okay, so for example, in cell D6, which is this one here, that's currently empty, and cell A10 says Snickers. Okay, so a bit like battleships, or you see sometimes maps which work like that. So essentially that means that Excel knows where something is in terms of the position, and then it also knows what's in each of the cells. And that's essentially how we then store data. What we generally do in science is we use the vertical columns, these ones here, as storage for variables. Okay, so for example, in this column here, we have a variable called type of chocolate, and then the rows are used to store individual data points. Okay, so the type of chocolate is our variable of interest, and these are the different forms that it can take. So in this case, the type of chocolate was Malteser. And that's generally how we always use Excel. Okay, so columns are used to store variables and rows are used to store individual data points. Now the first thing I'd like to know from you is whether you remember what kind of data type of chocolate is. So I'm going to pause the video here, and before you can continue with the workshop, you're going to have to answer the question of what kind of data type of chocolate would be. Okay, so well done. You have correctly identified the type of chocolate as a nominal variable. So that means it's categorical and there is no particular hierarchy amongst the different chocolate bars. This particularly here is the contents of one box of celebrations. And actually this data set is based on an article in the Liverpool Echo where they actually looked at a box of celebrations and checked out how many of the different chocolate bars there are of each of the types, because everyone always thinks that they are getting cheated out of their favorite, essentially. So you have down here all of the different chocolate bars that they found in this one box of celebrations, and our task for today is to count how many times each of the different chocolate bars occurs. So if you remember, I talked to you about this in the lecture, is the way we usually record and summarize categorical data is by giving each of the variations of a variable a frequency. Okay, how many times did it occur in the data set? This data set here is based on one box of celebrations, and we need to know how many times each of the different types of chocolate bars were counted. Okay, now that's pretty difficult in a data set that looks like this, where basically they've opened the box of chocolates, they've taken out a chocolate bar, and then wrote down what kind it was. And so they're all sort of in a random order in here. And in order to properly count these, we have to bring them into an order first. And that's one of the first things that I want to show you how to do in Excel. So when we have any sort of data in a column like this, we can actually change the order in which the different rows appear in order to give us a better overview of what we have. So for example, we can order and sort this data here to show the different types of chocolate by their name. alphabetically. Okay, so starting with, in this case, bounty, because that's B, and that will come up first in alphabetical order. And then that way we can count very simply how many times each of them occurs. We will do that manually in this workshop, but if you get all of these tasks done quite quickly today, there is an additional workshop that you can do which shows you a more advanced function in which you can actually skip this step. But I want to show you anyway how to sort data in Excel, so we'll do that first. So one thing that's important to note is that if you want to highlight data, so let's say we want to take this, all of this data that we have here, all of these rows which give us the different chocolate bars and the type of chocolate that we found here, you can do that either by clicking on the first one in this column, and then essentially just dragging the selection down, okay, like this, and that basically tells Excel whatever you're going to do in a second, you want to do that for all of these cells. Okay, so that's essentially highlighting the section with which you want to do something. So that's the first thing you need to do. You have to be a bit careful because you need to essentially have the cursor in the middle of the first cell here rather than down here, which is a completely different function. I'll show you that later. Okay, so make sure it's here, not up here on the outside of it, because if you've got this this kind of symbol here, that means you want to move the whole cell. I can do that as well. I can just drag this over to here and move the contents of cell A1 into cell C5. I don't want to do that. I just want to highlight. Okay, so if you want to highlight, make sure you've got this thick white cross and then highlight all of these cells. What you can also do is a little bit quicker, depending on whether you want to use this whole column here, and Excel will ignore any sort of empty cells which are down below. You can also just essentially make sure you hover over the column descriptor here called A, and just click on that, and it will highlight the whole of this column all the way down. Okay, both of those things work. And then what we want to do, we want to make sure we're in the Home tab up here, and we want to go into Sort and Filter. And that's where we can sort these chocolate bars by name. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to custom sort, because that gives us an option to tell Excel that this first cell here, type of chocolate, is a header. Okay, this is not part of the data. That just tells me what this data are, what these data are. So it's the name of the variable essentially rather than the actual data. The data starts in cell A2 with the first bounty that was found in this box. And if we do this, we can then tell Excel that we want to sort by column, and in this case type of chocolate, because that's the only column we have here. We want to sort the cell values, and we want to sort from A to Z. If I deselect this and I say my data doesn't have headers, then basically Excel won't know that the first cell A1 here is not part of the data. Okay, so that means it now knows that this is just the column header. So when we've done that, we just click OK. And what you got now is essentially all of the bounties first, then all of the galaxies, then all of the galaxy caramels, and so on. And it means that you can count these a little bit easier. And one very simple way of counting them is just to highlight, like I showed you before, all of the bounties, for example. Okay, so what I've done is I've clicked on this cell here, hold the cursor down, hold the mouse down, and then drag it all the way to the last bounty. And then down here, in this corner, you can see that there are 12 bounties. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to just type into this cell here that bounty occurs at the frequency of 12 in our data set. Okay, and then we want to find the Snickers. Okay, where are the Snickers? They're down here. Again, highlight all of them, and it tells you that there are 11. Okay, 11 Snickers. And let's have a look at the galaxy caramels. They're over here. Highlight them all. There are 10. Okay, so I want you to finish this, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to want to know how many Maltesers and Milky Ways there are, and then we'll continue when you've completed this whole table. Okay. Okay guys, great job on that. So hopefully your frequency table looks like mine. So it looks as though most of these are different types of chocolate occur at the same kind of frequency, but it looks like Galaxy and Twix are actually a little bit less common than the others. So I want to show you two more little things here, which is how to then use this data and summarize it a little bit more, and then also or using functions in Excel. And then I also want to quickly show you how to make a pie chart in Excel, which is very simple. Okay, so one thing that Excel does is it can calculate things from the data that you input. So for example, a very simple thing that we could do here is we want to know how many chocolate bars there are altogether. And Excel can do that by using a function called sum. So I want to tell myself that this is what I'm going to put in here. So total is just the name of what I'm doing. And the way to calculate anything is in Excel is to tell the program you're going to input a function using the equals sign. Okay, so type on your keyboard equals. And then there are loads of different functions that you can use. In order to add something together, you use the function called sum. And usually it will then come up in a list here. So you can just double click on that, and what happens is it opens a bracket, and now it wants to know, okay, what do you want me to sum up? And you need to highlight all of the cells that you want to sum up. So if we want to know how many chocolate bars there are altogether, we need to highlight all of these, okay? And what you now need to do is just to close the bracket at the end. Okay, so that's Shift and 0 on your keyboard. And then if you press enter, it will tell you how many chocolate bars there are altogether. And before we continue, I'd like you to tell me what number you get as a result of this. Okay, so hopefully you also have the result that there are 83 chocolate bars in a box of celebrations altogether. And we have looked at how many times each of the different types of chocolates occur in that box of chocolates. Now, if we wanted to display that graphically, this is a table, okay? This is one way of summarizing. We've already summarized the data here in a table. Technically, you could make that table look a bit nicer in a Word document, and you could use it to summarize your data that way. But quite often it's easier to look at something graphically. And as I've mentioned in the lecture, the simplest graph we can make with categorical data is a simple pie chart. And all the graphs that Excel can produce are in the Insert tab, okay? So what I want you to do is, usually when you make a graph, you will highlight the section that you want to make a graph out of, okay? So in this case, it's all of this, and that includes the names for the different chocolate bars as well, because obviously we want to let Excel know what we're putting in there, okay? So you've got frequency, and you've got the different chocolate bars here, and how many times they occur. Actually, we want to highlight just this bit, okay? So these are the names of your chocolate bars and their frequencies. You don't actually need to do this. And then if we go to the Insert tab up here, and here are all the different charts. Now, Excel has the possibility to look at recommended charts, but I don't recommend you doing that, because quite often it will misinterpret the data that we've put in, and it will show you the wrong graph. So it's better for you to learn which graph is appropriate in different situations, rather than using the recommended chart option. In this case, I've told you that the best chart to use would be a pie chart, and all we need to do is simply click on the symbol that represents the pie charts here, and we would use a simple 2D pie chart, because in science, the simpler the graph, the better. Okay, so you can make sort of very fancy ones. They can be three-dimensional and look all sorts of funky things. But in science, we usually prefer things to be nice and simple. So all you need to do is click on that, and Excel will produce a chart for you automatically. Nice and simple. Later on in the module, I'll show you how to manipulate charts. There are all sorts of things that you could do here, and all sorts of things you could add, but when it comes to the pie chart, we want to keep it nice and simple, and we could technically copy that straight into our Word document and use it for a report of some sort. Okay, so this was the first part. In the next video, we will do some more functions using using categorical data, using a different data set. And as I said, if you're done with everything before the hour is up, there's an additional sort of more advanced workshop that you can do as well.